Hello friends, welcome back to the next session on operations planning, scheduling and control. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be understanding and dealing with the concept of operations activity control. The learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand how do we define or what do we mean by the operations activity control, what are the various operations activity control activities that have been carried out in a business organization, and how those activities needs to be controlled in a business concern. The initial definition. So now let's first understand what do we mean by operations activity control. The operations activity control is a system of monitoring and regulating the huge physical facilities in a business organization. When we say a business or a manufacturing organization is into existence, when the production activity is being undertaken in the organization, there are several number of activities that have been conducted simultaneously. So when several number of activities are being conducted simultaneously, those particular activities are also geographically spread. The spread of those particular activities in a particular organization may be of a physical nature or of a non-physical nature, and accordingly monitoring of those particular activities at times may seem to be difficult. And hence, when the activity of monitoring and regulating a huge physical facility or geographical spread services is controlled, such activity is called as the production control or the operations control. In these particular series of activities and decisions done during the manufacturing process, the control on output is essentially required. And when there is the control on output can be undertaken only when we have a proper input into the organization. So providing the reasonable input based on which the proper series or coordinated well series of activities can be undertaken, and accordingly the activities can be completed in the specified deadline or the time period. It's called the operations activity control. The operations activity control focuses on the concept with respect to the input of the product to the output of the product that can be created in the organization, and ultimately when the product reaches to a consumer or to a certain individual, how those activities may lead to the customer satisfaction. Now let's understand what are the various good governance practices in terms of operations activity control. The task of predicting, planning and scheduling the work. So initially, in order to be our operations activity to be of a successful nature, one has to predict, one has to plan and one has to schedule the work. Predicting as to what activities has to be completed, when it has to be completed and how it has to be completed. Planning as to what series of activity has to be conducted and what should be the sequence. And lastly, scheduling is which activity should be prioritized, the first, second and the last, and so on. Next good governance practice with respect to the operations activity control is manpower, material availability and the other capacity restrictions. So what will be the availability or requirement of the manpower, what will be the availability or the requirement of materials and so on. And hence the capacity restrictions as to what quantity or amount of goods and services can be utilized, how those goods and services can be effectively used and those particular concerns. So all governance practices with respect to the material, the labor and so on needs to be utilized in a very effective way, and accordingly those things needs to be implemented. The next perspective is the concept of costing. In terms of the certain amount of costing, the operational activity focuses on what different types of cost can be associated in a business organization. The cost may be that can be associated in a business organization may be related to the prime cost, that is the direct material, direct labor and direct wages. It may be related to the operation cost, that is the administration cost, selling and distribution cost or the overhead cost and so on. The proper quality and quantity at the time of cost allocation and ascertainment of cost is essentially required, and one has to come to a conclusion about how a control on cost factor should be implemented. The next perspective is following up the schedule to see that the plan is being carried out. So accordingly one has to always see that whatever operational activities that are being conducted, they are conducted in a proper sequence and those particular sequence are being followed in a proper sequence, that is in a proper condition. The control on each and every single activity is to be there into existence, and all those activities should be well coordinated well in advance and the proper sequence should be complied. The next good governance practice is using whatever system have been proven satisfactory. So based on the past results, based on the past experiences, one has to come and one has to understand that what are the various good governance practices that was implemented earlier and whether the system that was being used earlier was beneficial, satisfactory in the organization or not. So ascertainment of organization activities from a past experience needs to be identified in a very effective way, and accordingly those activities needs to be complied, and hence past information is essentially important. Now let's understand what is the importance or the correlation between the PPC and the other component, that is production planning and control. With respect to the PPC and other components, that is production, operational activities and control, the other components that have been associated are the control room, the operations control center, and the project production management. In terms of the control room, all the activities that are needed to be conducted in a business organization or the manufacturing unit are being controlled from this particular location. The decision as to strategic decision or the operational decisions are being provided from the control room. It is a strategic business unit of a certain organization. In terms of the operations room, all the activities that have been related to the operations level or the shop floor level are being controlled from this particular location, and accordingly, those activities are being well coordinated in the business organization. In terms of the operations control center, it is located at the shop floor level or at the operations level, wherein actual activities are needed to be implemented and how those activities are being conducted. So, operations control center, usually the production manager or the manufacturer manager is the in charge of this particular section. The project production management. The project production management is a combination of the inventory department, the output, that is the sales or the stores department, and the manufacturing department. So a team of all those composition or all those factors come together, and accordingly they design and make a plan of how project production management can be undertaken. This project production management is always based on the consideration of demand and supply factors. That is how demand can be identified and how supply needs to be done of the various amount and quantity of goods and services. Now let's understand which are the 5 building blocks in the production planning and control. The 5 building blocks that have been associated or that can be identified is the scheduler, the dispatcher, the monitor, the mover, and the producer. Schedule is a particular person that the building blocks that can be created is if the plan or the series of activities are not being scheduled in a proper way. And hence at this particular stage, in case if the scheduling goes wrong, then accordingly the entire process will be in a dilemma or will be in a thoughtful situation and cannot be completed within the specified time period. The dispatcher, the one who is implementing this particular strategy and one who is looking for dispatching of goods and services, always needs to play an important role for dispatching of goods and services in the organization. The monitor. The monitor is a particular person who is available at the strategic business unit who monitors or who overviews and sees what activities are being conducted and how they can be implemented in the business organization. The mover, that is the one who passes on the decision or the information from one person to another person. That is the concept of mover that can be applied. And lastly, the producer, that is the place where the actual manufacturing decision can be implemented. That is the producer is the particular person who actually implements the decision either in the production department, management department, stores department, sales department, and so on. Now let's understand how do we implement or what are the applications oriented with respect to a operations plan. The first sequence or the series of the production or the operations management is first point that we need to consider is the location of facilities. So what are the various facilities that have been located, how those benefits can be arise or that can be created in a certain organization. All those operational activities needs to be identified, it needs to be assessed, and accordingly a plan or sequence of activities needs to be undertaken. The next perspective is plant layout and material handling. So what is the structure or layout of a certain plant? What are the various compositions with respect to the material handling system, the connectivity of the plant, the various features or the factors with respect to the internal and external environment? All those factors plays an important role with respect to the plant layout. The proximity and connectivity with the market are also the another sub considerations. The next application of the operational plan successful implementation is the product design. So what is the design of your product, whether the product design is acceptable or not acceptable as per the market standards, as per the need, want and desire of a certain customer or as the order that was being placed and so on. And hence the product design also defines how or how long your production planning activity can be undertaken in certain organization. The next example or the next consideration point is the process design. That is, what is the supply or the assembly line chain that can be implemented in the business organization. So the processing or flow of activities in a certain organization also needs to be assessed, needs to be identified, and accordingly the process needs to be created. The next application of consideration for the operation plan consideration is the production planning and control, that is PPC. In terms of the production planning and control, what is the series of activities that needs to be implemented, how those series of activities can be conducted, it can be organized, and how the planning and control of all those activities can be implemented in the organization needs to be ascertained. So hence PPC, that is production planning and control, is essentially important. The next consideration factor is the quality control. Ultimately, whenever an organization is looking for manufacturing or producing a certain product, ultimately one has to see that how do we control the quality of a certain product. The quality of a certain product needs to be controlled in a certain way, which ultimately deals with the customer satisfaction. Ultimately, when the customer is satisfied or happy with a certain product, only when the qualitative product is being delivered to him. And hence, the organization host also is always needs to monitor the quality of a certain product. The next perspective is the material management. In terms of the material management, it deals with the input and output of materials in a certain organization. That is, what amount or quantity of goods and services, that is the material or stores, is being received, and what amount of quantity of materials or the management is being going out of the particular organization. And hence, material management as to input and output process is essentially required. And lastly, maintenance management. The maintenance management as to job flow or the flow shop activity with respect to how maintenance of machinery, maintenance of people, or the job shop or the activity is needed to be undertaken, and how tiny or small activities can be repaired, that can be organized. So in this way, the production or the operations management activity is related to a certain operational planning that is into existence, and the operational planning activity is always based on the 8 components or the 8 factors that can be implemented in a certain organization, and hence there can be an effective implementation of a business organization which can be into existence and a profit making situation to the business concern. Now let's understand what are the various functions in the production activity and control. The various functions in the production activity and control is: it helps in planning, it helps in the execution of a certain plan, it ensures that the availability of the resources are there on time, it releases the shop floor orders, and accordingly it schedules the start and the completion time of a certain job, along with collecting the required information for a particular shop order. And lastly, it also deals in controlling the operational activities. So in a major concern, the production activity control focuses on the activity that has been conducted at the shop floor level. That is, the planning and execution of certain activities. That is, how a plan or a series of activities needs to be undertaken, how the flow of materials from one place to another place needs to be undertaken, and so on. Execution of the plan, that is, whatever plan that we have prepared, either maybe it be related to the production activity, supply activity, assembly line activity, and so on. Availability of resources, that is the factors of production, the land, labor, capital, enterprise, and resources, the resources as to available in the stores department, materials department, and so on. All those resources should be readily made available, and accordingly abundant quantity as to either the LIFO method or the FIFO method, whichever has been employed, all those resources should be utilized in an effective way. Releasing the shop orders. So whenever there is a job shop that is being raised or a work order management requisition that is being raised, all the shop orders should be complied or successfully implemented, and it should be fulfilled and it should be complied. Scheduling the start and the completion dates of the job. So accordingly, whatever start and completion date of the job is into existence, all those targets and the deadline should be met accordingly, and one has to see that those particular targets have been completed as and when the need arises. Collecting the required information for the job shop order. So collecting whatever information that is been required, the job shop order is essentially required, and hence those job shop orders are essential of an important nature. And lastly, helps in controlling the operations. So the major importance of the production activity and control is it helps in controlling the operations activity that are being conducted in the business organizations. Now let's understand what are the 5 building blocks that can be there in concerns of production activity and control. The major 5 building blocks are establishing the order priority, maintaining the order priority, checking out the actual performance, monitoring and control the work in progress, that is the lead times, and lastly, reporting the work center performance. So according to the priority of a certain work, how and what priority of the work needs to be undertaken, checking whether the activity is been completed within the specified time period or not, and so on. And lastly, monitoring and controlling the work in progress, that is how the work or the process activity is being undertaken in a certain organization with respect to the work center performance that is being undertaken. That is, the work center performance focuses on the activities that have been undertaken for a specified time period or for an indefinite time period. Now let's understand what is the role of production activity and control. The production activity and control focuses on overseeing the manufacturing work on the shop floor. So whatever activities that have been undertaken on the shop floor, all those activities needs to be controlled. It should have a proper observation and mechanism, and so on. The manufacturing activity needs to be completed. Managing the production process, right from the input of the goods and services to the completion of the finished goods, all the production processes needs to be controlled in a very effective way and should be managed by the production activity and control. So the role of PAC is of an important or a prime nature. Aim for production planning to be met. So whatever plan that have been made with respect to the production activity, all those plans should be met in the business organizations, and accordingly all those planning activities should be completed as and when the need arises. Assist in the creation of schedules. So whatever schedule that needed to be created, all those assistance of the creation of those particular schedules needs to be implemented, and accordingly the assistance in creation of schedules should be complied as and when the need arises. Now let's understand what is the correlation between the production activity and scheduling and the MRP, that is material requirement planning. Now these particular activity that have been undertaken, they are always undertaken for completing a certain work order. That is, whenever a particular work order is being generated, always we are aiming to see that whatever work order that is being generated or whatever production activity that we need to undertake, it has been complied within a specified time period. So taking charge of a certain work order and ensuring that all the tasks are being completed in a specified time period, that particular activity is called the material requirement planning. Sending the work orders to the shop or for production. So whenever a particular work order is being given, one has to ensure, one has to see that all those activities have been completed in the specified time period, and the production activity is also quite sufficient and is also of a fulfilling nature. Managing the day-to-day operations and providing the essential support. So whatever day-to-day operations activities are needed to be undertaken, providing the assistance or support to all those particular activities is essentially required, and accordingly the MRP and PAC also helps in conducting those activities in a very effective way. To be in charge of an immediate comprehensive planning of flow of orders through the production planning. So implementation of those particular activities, execution of those particular activities is essentially required, and accordingly overseeing the work as it moves in a completion stage is of utmost importance, and hence movement of goods and services from one level to another level is of essential importance nature, and one has to monitor or control all those activities. So in a case, when the production activity management is been taken, one has to understand or one has to see that all those activities should be there in a coordinated way, and those activities should be complied in a specified time period. For those particular constitution, certain activities or tasks such as scheduling, releasing, tackling the production, having or monitoring the access, availability of material and resources, planning and control of operations, all those activities are needed to be conducted in a very better, effective way, and only then we can say that production activity control is quite effective. As a result of this, the production activity and control can be a charge of converting plans which can provide a benefit or fruitful to a certain organization in the long-term case or in a long-term scenario. So in the long-term case, the much needed benefit or the right direction can be provided, and a well-coordinated series of activities can be completed in a business organization. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what do we mean by the work order scheduling and the operations planning that can be conducted. We have also understood the concept of which planning is being required in terms of goods and services, and lastly, how the activities under the operation planning in terms of material requirement planning, in terms of PAC, in terms of operational planning can be implemented in the business organization. I hope you must have enjoyed your learning at this particular stage. Thank you for your patience listening. We'll stay connected. Thank you.